joining us today. I think we've got a great program put together on cyber ransom negotiation. Our speaker today, Kurtis Minder, is he's the CEO of GroupSense. Frequent contributor on CNN, I think featured on CNN earlier this morning. And we were just talking in our practice earlier this week and before this session. There's a great article in this week's New Yorker by Kurtis. I mean, obviously, cybersecurity and ransom has become a hot topic. Millions of dollars paid, and I think a projection of like 70 billion or something like that to be paid this year. A unique career because a few years ago no one knew what a cyber ransom negotiator was. Even though hackers have been around for quite a while. So without anything further, I'm going to turn it over to Kurtis. Thanks, Kurtis.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to share some slides, and then I'm going to just kind of freeform talk before we go through them. I don't want to. What I would like to do is go through these slides sort of relatively quickly because a lot of it's going to be review. Like Brian said, this is a pretty well-known topic. When I do these talks, I tend to get a lot of questions. And so I want to leave room for that because I think that's where a lot of the value lies is getting those tactical questions answered. So let me share my screen and maybe Brian and Bethany, you can validate that this is working properly. Can you see that?
Looks good.
Okay, so we have the legalese. I'm sorry, were you guys going to record this as a reminder?
Yes, we're recording.
Oh, okay, just checking. Thank you. So a little bit about me. This is the credibility slide. Make you guys think I'm credible enough to do this. I've been in the cybersecurity field for over 20 years before it had a label, and I worked primarily as an engineer for most of my career, and started working at security-focused startups probably 12 years ago, something like that. And went through a couple of buyouts, a couple of IPOs, started my own business. The GroupSense turned 7 years old, I think last Tuesday, a week ago Tuesday. We did not take a bunch of venture capital. This is not one of these fast-growing software as a service companies. What we did instead, and investors don't like this, but what we did instead is we grew one customer at a time and basically made our customers our product management team, and effectively just said, hey, what can we do from a delivery standpoint that is actually operationalized in your environment better? How can we make sure that whatever information we're sending you is useful to you? And so over the years we've built a pretty good portfolio of digital risk products. What that effectively means is we're looking outside the customer's network perimeter for anything that could impact the customer negatively, and that includes things like brand fraud, brand attacks, VIP protection. We protect like mayors of major cities, things like that. We're also looking at the sexy things like we're monitoring dark web forums and underground chat rooms for things that might impact our clients. And what I thought I'd do is I'd start with a story about how Brian called it a profession. I kind of wince when you say that because how I got started doing this. It happened about 2 years ago. And one of the things that our core product does is it monitors for what we call initial access brokers. Part of the pervasiveness of ransomware is due to the fact that it has been simplified to where the threat actors no longer need to be technically sophisticated to carry it out. And what's happening is in the underground markets, and all these underground markets, there are basically two roles that enable this at scale for an unsophisticated actor. And role number one is what I mentioned earlier is the initial access broker. All these people do is they use internet scanning tools, things like that, to try to find vulnerabilities on anybody's network. They're not typically targeting a particular vertical or a company, but when they get in, when they find a way in, they validate that, they get into the network, they get access, and then they go sell that access on an underground market. The buyer could be anyone, basically. It could be anyone that has any computer savvy that knows how to get on the dark web. You don't have to be a hacker, but you could buy that network access. The second role is the actual ransomware operators or the ransomware as a service operators. And what they do is they have a whole platform that allows you to enable ransomware inside a network. So you've got the piece where you've got someone who's gotten network access, and you've got the piece where someone could deploy and execute the ransomware and then do the transaction. That person can also buy that service. So you can buy the access, buy the service. So you've got somebody who is not a hacker, but has a little bit of Bitcoin to throw around, throws it at the network access broker or the initial access broker, throws it at the platform, sticks them together, and boom, you've got a ransomware execution on an enterprise or small business. And then they share the profit. The platform, the ransomware as a service, shares the profit. So how I ended up doing this is our company is detecting initial access brokers all the time. And when we detect one that we think impacts our clients, we obviously validate all of that, get the forensic data, give it to our clients, try to figure out how the bad guy got in and cut him off. That's what we try to do. So the ransomware never gets deployed. In one case, we found a ransomware, an initial access broker who had impacted a non-client, but a well-known software company. And we decided it was in our best interest to just notify them free of charge. I didn't let my sales guys even know that it was a thing. Like, I didn't want them to go sell these guys. I just wanted to help them out. So we did that. And what it turned out was when they started cutting off the access because of our notification, the bad guy saw that, hey, look, they figured out I'm in here. They're cutting me out. And he pulled the ripcord and he executed some ransomware. And at the time, that company had cyber insurance, and the cyber insurance company said, hey, the people that normally help us with this are overwhelmed. There's too many of these cases. Can you do this? And my initial answer was, no. No, I don't want to do that. I don't know anything about that. We're cyber reconnaissance people. I'm not a negotiator. That's not our core business. And what ended up happening was they asked me to go find someone to do it for them. And I did. I went and found a specialist who does this freelance. I contracted that person, and we were going to bring them into the negotiation. When we had the first meeting with the executive team of that company, the guy I contracted neglected to show up for the meeting. And I'm not making this up. And so I just kind of BS'd my way through that meeting. I'm being transparent. In a moment of weakness, I thought, I'll find this guy and he'll come back and take care of the rest of this. I just need to get through this meeting. He never showed up. So that, shame on me for my recruiting skills. But ultimately, I ended up doing the entire negotiation with the threat actor. And in the end, we reduced the ransom amount to about 10% of the original asking price, which started in the millions. And we were able to get all of the data back, and all the data that they were threatening to leak, we were able to get destroyed. And the cyber insurance company and law firms involved said, hey, you have a knack for this, and we've got a bunch more. Can you help us out? And so that's how it started about 2 years ago. The company now, we have multiple negotiators that we've trained up. I handle the high profile cases a lot of times, the ones that are on the news. The other negotiators handle as many of the other ones as we can. And unfortunately, there's plenty of volume. So that's kind of the story. What I wanted to talk about today is just a 101. What do these things look like? And maybe a little bit about how you can avoid them and what to do to prepare. Just a couple of statistics, and Brian, you touched on some of these. The amount that is being asked and the total aggregate amount of money that's leaving the country on a daily basis over digital currency as a result of ransomware attacks has gone up considerably in like the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, 2-3 years ago, average ransomware payment was $14,000. The average, I think it's actually above this now. The last statistic I heard was 180. So that's a significant increase. Obviously the volume's gone out, so you know how math works. The mean average sort of goes up as well. I think, and I'm going to say this several times during the presentation, I think the thing that bothers me about this is when you hear about these things on the news, when you hear about Colonial Pipeline and you hear about the meat packing company, it doesn't represent most of the victims, right? Those are the high profile ones. Those are the ones that make the news. Most of the victims are small to medium businesses, probably much in the profile of a lot of the attendees. Those folks are not well represented, and I want to talk about that some more. So it's getting to the point where I like to say, like, well, people thought COVID was maybe not a big deal until they knew somebody who had it or was affected by it, right? Same thing with ransomware. People will say, hey, you shouldn't negotiate with hackers because it just encourages the hackers. And I'm like, well, you don't know a victim, right? And a victim is in a unique situation where And in many cases, it's pay the ransom or go out of business. And that's not a fair situation to be in. And I'll talk about what I'm doing to foster a better program with the US government toward the end. The impact of these things is not just that your files are locked, but you're losing productivity, you're losing customer interaction. And one of the things that's not illustrated on this slide is that you're actually it's impacting your clients a lot of times. The standard MO, and I'll go into this detail in a bit, of a threat actor is not just to lock the files with an encryption key, but also now they're exfiltrating or stealing some of your data and then threatening to leak it or leaking it to incent you to pay them quicker. And that data impacts your brand, your credibility, and your client's security. Just sort of, the other things that small businesses need to be worried about that we see a lot of is obviously the social engineering fraud. And some of that actually plays directly into the invoice manipulation frauds. Probably, I bet some of you have had this happen to you, where somebody in your company sends an email to the CFO or the controller or the finance organization and says, wire money to this customer right now, or something's going to happen. This is pervasive and you got to watch out for it. I'm just going to skip to the bottom bullets because that's really what this is about. The ransomware and digital extortion is everywhere. And if it hasn't happened to you or someone it's going to get there relatively quickly. So what does an attack sort of playbook look like? So there's the breaking and entering. I mentioned the initial access brokers. Sometimes the ransomware actors themselves, if they're targeting an industry, and they do that, will break into the network or buy access to the network. Then, like I mentioned, they exfiltrate as much data as they can, as long as they remain access brokers. We have the ransomware actors themselves. The ransomware actors do often break in themselves too, or buy the access themselves, especially if they're targeting a particular company or industry, and they do have sort of prioritized list of industries. And I mentioned the initial access broker. A lot of times you can just buy that access from someone. Then the next step is stealing the data or exfiltrating the data. As long as they're undetected, they will take as much of that as they can get. And I think the thing to recognize about this, and when I talk about the negotiation strategy, this is very pertinent, is that they have access to your finances. So you can't lie to them about how much money you have. And a lot of people, we've been pulled in many times, unfortunately, to do cleanup on other negotiations that have gone wrong. And I'll tell you when negotiations go wrong, when you tell the bad guy they're a bad guy and try to make it belligerent or antagonistic, there's no positive outcome from that. And two, when you lie to them. And so I'll come back to the strategy in a second. And then after they think they've exfiltrated enough damaging data, they start locking your network, your machines, everything like that. You come in one day and you find out that you're about to have a really bad day. And then if you follow the instructions on the ransom note, you're going to get a price and a deadline. And as soon as you engage, the clock starts ticking and the pressure is on and the data potentially starts leaking and things like that. So, what we're trying to say is don't try to do this on your own. Don't go visit these dark websites on your own. You shouldn't do that anyway. It's a little risky. Pull in someone who's done this before that knows the process. So what you're going to see is a file or a screen like this that says your network's been infected. It'll be rather general. It won't give you a whole lot of data. Usually that is accompanied by a ransom note. And I apologize for the small print. This is not really meant for you to read, but I'll tell you kind of the rough idea of what these are. They'll say, hey, you've been infected by, and whoever the ransomware actor or ransomware as a service platform is, in this case, it was Ragnar Locker. They tell you what not to do. Do not modify the files. Do not bring in a specialist to help you decrypt them, blah, 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 right? They explain to you kind of what they've done and that they've downloaded your data and they've got so many megabytes or data or gigabytes of your data. And by the way, I've seen as little as 500 meg and as much as 400 terabytes exfiltrated from a victim. So they do take a lot of data if they can get it. Then they tell you what you should do. They tell you that you should contact them. That's their main goal, is to get you in a dialogue with them And then of course they want you to do a transaction, etc. Underneath all of this, which is probably not showing up on this screen, but basically they're going to say, you know, we honor our agreement with you. We're going to tell you how we got in. We're going to give you your files back, and we'll, yeah, etc. And here's how you get to us. And they'll give you basic instructions on how to get to usually a dark web site to talk to them. What does the dark web site look like? It looks like a website. And actually, some of them are quite professional. They look well built, like, you know, you'd see something from a professional company. On the upper left-hand corner, almost universally, you will have a clock. The clock will be static until you log in, and as soon as you log in, it starts ticking down. And then they say if you do not pay on time, as you can see, they'll threaten to double the price. And sometimes it will also say, you know, that if we're going to leak X number of your files per day until you pay. You've got the tab there that says instructions. You've got chat support, new. It's funny, it's not new. And then you've got the about us. In here, you're going to find also a proof of life section. It's probably below this if we scroll down. I think I have a screenshot of that as well. But this is where all the interaction with the threat actor happens. In this case, they're asking for Monero, which is more and more common instead of Bitcoin. Here you go. So proof of breach. So they're going to show there might be a file share where they show the files that they've stolen. Hey, look, we got 76 gig of your data. In addition to that, they have a section, maybe I don't have the screenshot for it. I don't, but basically where they call proof of life, where you can upload a couple of small encrypted files that they've encrypted, and they will send them back to you decrypted. And the point is, they want to prove to you that they have the capability to decrypt these files, right? So now you've got proofs, you know they have your data, you got proof that they've locked your data and they can unlock it, and you got a price and a time frame, right? That's all kind of coming together. I mentioned the dark web. I assume everybody knows what this is, but just quickly, you can accidentally access it. You have to have special software to do it and special configuration to do it. Much of the dark web is benign and useless stuff. There's even you know, relatively positive things in the dark web. Like one of my analysts runs a church on the dark web. So it's not all bad. It says dark and it sounds scary. There are useful purposes for it, but a lot of the activity is nefarious, and the main purpose behind the dark web is anonymity. So the anonymity plus the anonymity afforded by digital currency allows them to basically do all of this without being detected for the most part. You'll hear deep web sometimes in the news, maybe. That is anything the best way to describe that is deep web is anything that the search engines don't index. So that's dynamic content. That's like when you search Google, you don't get a tweet as a result. That's by design. That would mess up Google's algorithm terribly if they indexed everyone's tweets, right? So technically, Twitter is deep web. Anything that's behind a authentication mechanism or invite only, you know, underground or sorry, paywalls, things like that are deep web. And I think we illustrate this on the slide because some of this stuff happens deep web as well. Like it's not all in the dark web. So, this is a screenshot of an initial access broker. So they don't say your company name. This is the other tricky part is they won't go, I have access to, you know, Acme Inc. Come, you know, the bid is X or whatever, contact me. What they say is this, revenue, 16 billion, PM for discussion, right? Or they'll say the industry. They'll say electronics manufacturer, 7 billion, 300,000 employees, contact me, something like that. And so they'll give a profile. So part of the trick is and our software is pretty good at this, but it's tricky, is understanding that language and looking for the right profile to detect these things. And by the way, this is an example of a deep website. This is not a dark website. The xss.in, .is is a Russian deep web forum. It is not on the dark web. You can access this with a regular web browser today. Don't do that, please. So what the best thing you could do is plan in advance for this. Hopefully, you know, an occurrence that never happens, but planning is a good thing. So I assume most of you guys have some sort of incident response plan. If there's a breach, I'm sure you have some sort of notification plan, but you need to call out ransomware specifically because it has a different kind of impact. A traditional breach is somebody stole your data. It doesn't necessarily impact the day-to-day operation of your business. And so it's closer to a disaster recovery plan. It's almost like a hybrid of the two, right? A disaster recovery plan and an incident response plan that got married, and it's like the same thing. And so you need to call those things out. That's something that we do. If you need help or advice is free. I'm happy to talk to you about it. We always encourage the victims to contact law enforcement. Law enforcement's not actually going to help you, but they are building the case that I'm going to talk about later. The FBI is keeping track of as many of these as they can, and that's getting to the White House. And it's important that they understand who's being impacted, how often, how much are they paying. All that stuff's useful to them. They will officially tell you don't pay the ransom because that's what they're officially supposed to say. But they will sit there and smile and nod their head and understand when you have to do it. The other thing that we learned kind of in the middle of this early on was you need to identify as a victim who is in the decision room in advance. So that might be your chief financial officer, the president or CEO of the company, and maybe your internal or external counsel, a legal person is advised, and potentially somebody like me who can help you make the business decision. Do we want to pay? And that's number 6 here. Like, well, do you pay or do you not pay? That could be that decision is driven by a couple things. One, it could be a principle thing. And I totally understand, and I don't judge. We had people who got hit and said, I will never pay these guys. It's against my principles. That's cool. That's a business decision. Totally respect that. I don't want to pay them either. They're bad guys. I get it. But you need to decide that in advance. And then once, let's say you had decided, well, it's possible that we would pay if we had to. Well, what is that line? What level of business impact requires you to move forward with a ransomware negotiation? And having that discussion in advance, choosing who the decision makers will be on the day that it happens in advance is immensely valuable. Cyber insurance, if it's definitely worth taking a look at. It's gotten more expensive, but it may be worth it, right? You need to look at it from a business standpoint. And then, of course, you really shouldn't pay what they're asking. And they know that because it's like going to the car dealer, right? They're asking for more than the car is worth from the beginning because they're expecting you to talk them down. And this is also true in the case of ransomware. This slide's kind of silly because they say the same thing. It doesn't matter what size your company are. These are really the things that you need to consider high level when this occurs, right? The small business has the same kind of questions as the large enterprises. Like, what is a sort of a budget, and what are you willing to pay, price range? What is the impact of the business? And then what happens afterwards? And this is interesting because a lot of people forget that, hey, they not only did they lock your files, but they took a bunch. And you're making an agreement with someone that says that, hey, you know what? I know I took a bunch of your files. I deleted them. Don't worry about it. Those aren't going to show up anywhere, promise. You should probably make sure that doesn't happen. And there are services like GroupSense, for example, that help you do that. When we have these events, we always work with the incident responders, we work with the victims, and we take inventory on how the threat actors got access to begin with. And this is the frustrating thing. And here's a little rant because Brian mentioned they have me on TV all the time, and everyone is asking questions about reactions, right? Like, let's ban Bitcoin, let's ban the right to pay a ransom. And it is not illegal, by the way, but there's an asterisk there, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But let's ban. This is terrorism. I mean, we're not sending Blackhawks to Belarus anytime soon, I don't think. So. The hyperbole is a little bit unhelpful. And what the thing that frustrates me is when I look at this list, and I don't have to read it off to you, most of this stuff's preventable. We don't have to do this to begin with. We don't have to have a discussion about paying ransoms if we do some basic things. And in the case of Colonial Pipeline, he got on and testified in front of Congress, Mr. Blunt did 2 days ago, and he said it was a stolen credential from an employee that doesn't work here anymore that reused their password. Easily preventable. It was on a VPN concentrator that we forgot about, left open, and didn't have two-factor authentication. Easily preventable. And what we learned, and it's frustrating for us as security practitioners, that 90+% of the time we could have prevented this to begin with. And that's really what I want to convey in this call is you don't even need to know me if you do these things. I'm a nice guy, so I'm great for a cup of coffee. But like if you call me on my day job, it's probably bad for you. And I'm hoping that this list gets out. And if you need advice, like I said, advice is free. I do mean that. I believe you get what you put into the universe, and I'm happy to help if you guys need some advice on what these things mean and how to do them. Most of these are in the reach of a small to medium business as well, not complicated. When is negotiating the ransom not okay? By law? When the person that you're negotiating with and or facilitating a payment to is on the OFAC sanctions list. The Treasury Department has released a list of entities that the Office of Foreign Asset Control has decided are enemies of the United States, and we should not give them money ever in any way. They keep that list, and when we do engage with a client, we're a threat intelligence company. We do cyber reconnaissance. We know a lot about the bad guys. So once we figure out who is the perpetrator of the attack, we run that through our OFAC list and determine if the threat actor is involved in this list in any way. And that could be where they're based, where members of the entity are based. Like for example, DarkSide, the one that Colonial paid, they're kind of in the gray area because DarkSide, while DarkSide is largely based in Russia, they have entities that we've traced back to Iran and North Korea. And when I say entities, I mean individuals that participate. And bad, right? And so we check that on the front end. On the back end, when we get the digital wallet for the threat actor we're about to pay, before we pay, we do crypto analysis on that wallet to determine if that wallet is domiciled in any of those places or has recently transacted with anybody in any of those places. So that we're checking all the boxes to make sure we're doing the right thing, by the U.S. government and national security. I won't go through the case study because I think I told a bunch already. There's a lot of other values to using digital risk products, whether it's us or someone else, to monitor for intellectual property theft, things like other than ransomware. And you can save your company a lot of money and a lot of embarrassment by looking outside your network for threats. I think that's it. Yeah, and I'll open it up to questions. I saw some pop up. Hopefully, there's a few.
Thank you so much, Kurtis. If there are any questions, go ahead and put those over in the chat feature and we will start sifting through those.
I can't see the chat feature. I think you stole it from me.
There is one over here. I had read on the news that hackers, when paid, do follow through, although some companies have said they unlock key when it applied and they take much longer from restoring from backup. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, so what we're talking about with the decryption tools, as they're called often, is just technical difficulties. These ransomware operators are not practicing cryptographers. They're reusing tech. They're borrowing tech. They're sort of cobbling things together. In some cases, we've had a handful of ones that where we paid the ransom. They did what they said. They gave us the decryption tool, and it decrypted some of the files, but not all of them. And when you talk about the time to decrypt, when you start talking about things like virtual machines and stuff like that, there's multi gigabyte files. Just the nature of cryptography is it takes a lot of math for a computer to decrypt that, to do the math to decrypt that. So yeah, that's part of that business decision to decide like, well, I mean, a lot of our infrastructure is virtualized, and if they encrypted that, we'd be better off just throwing new VM images out of the backup on there versus waiting for the bare metal machine to decrypt this. So that happens. But I will say most of the time, it just works. The decryption works. It works relatively quickly, and you get your files back. And it does depend on the threat actor group. And actually, that's one of the things we talked on the front end is, we know who they are. So like I can tell you if it's like REvil, I can tell you before we ever start talking to REvil what is going to work and what's not going to work and how long it's going to take and whether they're going to be antagonistic or not, or because we've done so many, we kind of know who we're dealing with. Yeah, so somebody's dealt with this before where the directory structure can impact the decryptor. So the decryptor is often doing absolute file paths. Super simplistic, right? Absolute. So that means it depends on where you execute the decryptor to determine whether it will actually work.
Perfect. If there's any other questions over here, you can go ahead and send those over. Oh, here's another one.
Yes, I see it. Yeah, they do. And what's almost comical about it is from the very beginning of the transaction, the threat actors are pretending to be business people. They don't behave like they're criminals. They treat this as if they're selling you a business product, a security product, for example. And they do this all the way to the end of the transaction. And at the end of the transaction, a lot of times, and this is relatively recent, let's say in the last couple months, they send over their version of a legal statement or document, and they use like legal sort of language, whereas, therefore, and forthcoming this blah blah blah, and they'll actually give a guarantee that they destroyed your data and that they will not leak it in the future. So it's clever. Projected to be 1 trillion. Man, I don't know. So Richard Stinnen, if anybody, so the question, in case anybody can't see it, they read that the industry is projected to be $1 trillion a year, true or false. So Richard Stinnen is a really well-known industry analyst. He happens to be on our board of advisors, and he's actually a close personal friend. And we have arguments about this, about how this is projected. The fact that much of this happens without being reported on untraceable digital currencies, and so as we learned with the FBI, and we know because we do it in-house, Bitcoin is not untraceable. We can trace transactions from wallet to wallet on the blockchain. But many of the currencies are pretty much untraceable, like the Monero example I showed earlier. So, I would err on the high side. I can't say if it's 1 trillion, but it is a lot more than is being reported. And that's the scary part. Suggestions to strengthen the human firewall. So the question is, even with MFA, strong passwords, the human firewall breaks down. Other suggestions to strengthen the human firewall. Yeah, and it was actually sort of lightly illustrated in the list. User awareness and training is a very worthwhile investment. It sounds cliche, but it does help, and also reinforcement of policies. So, for example, in the case of Colonial Pipeline, they talked about a leaked credential, right? When that employee was there, that meant that they used a corporate Colonial Pipeline email address, and they signed up for, I don't know, iloveknitting.com. Okay. And they used a password for iloveknitting.com that is the same as the password they use at work. And then iloveknitting.com got hacked, and the bad guys had a copy of their corporate credential and their corporate password. And so that happens every day to every business. People use their corporate email. So there are services, GroupSense provides one of these, that does account takeover protection, which basically looks at all of the data leaks and all of the breaches that happen and looks for the corporate credentials of our clients, and then notifies them when someone has used their corporate credential and that has been modified in a breach or been exposed in a breach. And then what you want to do is lock that user's account, send them an email and said, you violated corporate policy by using your corporate email outside of the enterprise, and this is the result. You're in this breach. This is the warning. Please reset your password. Also enable MFA. Because that pretty much takes care of it in general. But yeah, so just user reinforcement is key. And you guys, there's lots of free tools to do this, like Have I Been Pwned? I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Funny name, but worthwhile service to detect whether your company's domain or email domain has been compromised in breaches. I think we got a duplicate there. Bethany, Brian, do you guys have any comments or questions, thoughts?
There's one more that just came in too. Sure. Tell us the potential for cell phones to hack and ransom in the near future.
Yes, we've had a lot of talk in the industry and with like government entities like CISA about the next iteration of this, and one of them is mobile and IoT. and IoT is Internet of Things, right? So that's your TVs, your video conferencing equipment, your cameras, things like that. They have IP addresses connected to the internet. Lots of vulnerabilities there, and certainly that is an attack surface that the threat actors could exploit. We haven't seen a ton of it, but we do see a lot of other fraud related to cell phones. And the main thing that I would suggest is when you're using, for example, MFA, use a proper MFA token or an authentication app like Google Authenticator or something, or Duo has a good one. These are free, and they generate the codes for your MFA. Don't use text messages if you can avoid it, because people can clone your phone. And the other protection against that is, and they can intercept these SMSs. The other protection is for most carriers, you can put an additional PIN on your phone that keeps people from being able to do this. And so I suggest that, go into the web interface of your phone carrier and make sure that you have the security PIN for any changes to your phone. That means if somebody goes to a Verizon store and perpetrates to be you because they've got some, data leak, credentials, personal information from someplace, they will need to know a PIN before they can make any changes to your account.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
And there's all these things because I do them myself, because I'm obviously a target because they keep putting me on television.
I'm sure you are probably a high target right now. Yeah. Okay, there's one more over here. There are business email services available. Are these more for less secure than regularly used ones?
Let me see. I'm not sure if I understand the question. If you mean regularly used, you mean than Gmail, probably, or something like that. Potentially, I mean, if you use like a managed service, a company that does managed email hosting, those potentially, and I can't necessarily think of one off the top of my head that I would recommend, but they would be paying closer attention to the security infrastructure of the email. But even Gmail has a corporate edition that has built-in anti-malware, anti-phishing capability. And as far as I know, it's relatively effective. But yeah, I mean, your individual email account probably doesn't have the same level of protection as a corporate sponsored one. Kind of you get what you pay for.
Perfect. Thank you. Brian, do you have anything else?
Hey, Kurtis, what about, password managers? Like Apple and Google have both started to strengthen, their password managers that are, kind of out of the box, but then there's LastPass and several others. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on the different password managers?
Yeah, I mean, this can be a controversial topic too, because it's like an eggs in a basket thing. It's like, well, if I put all of my passwords in one place, what happens if that gets cracked, right? But it's just my personal belief that it's better to have a tool like that automatically generating and saving very complex passwords than you writing them down someplace or reusing passwords, which are basically the two other alternatives. And while I don't have a specific recommendation, and we do use these in-house, but I don't like to necessarily endorse a company, I do recommend using them. And some of them, like LastPass, for example, have pretty cool features around password resetting, where they have APIs to a lot of the major vendors, software vendors, and you can just hit one button and it will automatically go through and reset all your passwords, which is extremely valuable without you having to log in and do the reset and all this other stuff. So I do recommend using those. Like I said, I don't like to make a particular recommendation, but they're very effective security tools. And a lot of them have the MFA thing that I talked about built into them. So like LastPass, I think, does as well. And Duo does both of those things, where you can do your MFA codes on the app, so you can kind of do two in one.
Right. Good.
All right, if there's any other questions, you can put those over in the side feature. Otherwise, this is being recorded, and so we will send out a recording to all the attendees from today.
I think I went too fast.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one more. With ransom so much in the news now, do you think there's going to be increased pressure on ransomware gangs to stay out of the spotlight?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad they asked that, because that I didn't really talk about some of my government efforts. Yes, I do think that the ransomware actors, what I would say is, now that we're paying attention, and it took the Colonial Pipeline and the meatpacking attack for us to pay attention. And one of my gripes that I've always said on the media was like, hey, this has been happening for years to thousands of small businesses, nobody cared, and now all of a sudden it's terrorism. Okay, well, I'm glad that they're paying attention. At least they're paying attention, right? And I'm sure the message is to the threat actors in Minsk or Moscow or wherever, that hey, enjoy that money in Russia, because if you leave, you're probably going to get caught at the airport. Like, don't stick your toe outside the border. And that's a fair message to send. Like, you can operate in impunity in Russia, and unofficially, Russia has given these folks amnesty as long as they're attacking entities outside of Russia. In fact, some of the malware has been analyzed to show that if your primary keyboard setting in Windows, for example, is Russia or Ukrainian, the malware won't execute. So they actually have the software look to see, like, are you in Russia, like that kind of thing. And there are some cute tools that people have written to sort of fake that, although the threat actors quickly figure out how to get around it. So I'm not suggesting that you go change your keyboard to Russian and learn Russian, although that would probably work. That's a lot to do. That's a heavy lift for your organization. So I think it is going to put some pressure on them. Although I will say, in some cases, like I mentioned, REvil, they're a major player. We run into them all the time. They announced, when the U.S. announced, hey, this is we're going to treat this like terrorism. They took offense to that, and they immediately put out a press release. It was in Russian, but and it's funny that these guys are doing press releases, right? And they said, hey, for the last year, we've stood down on attacking critical infrastructure, hospitals, charities, things like that. But because you guys are taking such an offense to us, we're going to change our mind, and we're going to just attack those things now. And so they kind of doubled down on the attack, which they can do because they're in Russia, and we're not going to go get them easily. So two things to mention about what we can do to curb this. One is, the main thing is this is preventable for the most part. That list that I showed, that's the cheapest thing the U.S. can do, is just help people, get the message out, help people get to that basic cyber hygiene level. And you could see that it's, I'm not digging on small businesses, because you can see, like, Colonial Pipeline didn't have it, right? It's like, in some ways, and I said this on CNN, because they were saying, well, what do you think about that? And I said, well, I'm not surprised that they didn't have MFA enabled, because I see this all the time from major companies, but also sort of sympathetic because their attack surface is large. Like, they have a very large infrastructure, and if there's one VPN concentrator they forgot about, that'll happen sometimes in a big company. So I'm simultaneously sympathetic. So the main thing is, like, yes, we can stop paying ransoms if we just do this basic cyber hygiene. On top of that, I've been working with the ransomware task force. I've been calling and messaging members of Congress, and I've been shouting on television about how the U.S. government could create a comprehensive program that helps both prevent ransomware by awareness and assisting in those cyber hygiene things, but then also giving a subsidy program to help companies recover from ransomware without paying a ransom. And there would be an ROI on that for the U.S. government, because, like we said, billions of dollars a year, or at least, are leaving the country, every year through these digital currencies and through the acts of ransomware. And so that's something I'm working on to see if there's a way we can do this sort of legislatively and support, especially the small businesses, who I think are the ones that are getting overlooked. And I get frustrated when I see people get up and say, ban paying ransoms. Like, that's pretty short-sighted for people who would go out of business if they didn't do it, right? So it's all stick and no carrot, I guess, is my point. And I think that there's a more comprehensive approach, and that's something I'm working on.
Thank you. I don't see any other ones that have come in. This has been very informative. We really appreciate your time today, Kurtis.
Sure. I see one more.
Oh, yep, I do.
So if the value of Bitcoin plummets, do you think we will see the resurgence of using 7-Eleven and Amazon gift cards, or will ransomware dry up? Yeah, so actually this person's very informed. Tyler is very informed, because that's the way before digital currency was a thing. Ransomware was still around, but they were using things like gift cards to get the money transferred. The amounts were much smaller, hundreds of dollars, right? And now cryptocurrency sort of made it easy for them to do these large amounts. No, I don't think so, and it's because of what I said earlier, where Bitcoin is one cryptocurrency. It's arguably the easiest to transact with, but it is also the most traceable and most visible. There are thousands of other cryptocurrencies, and on the thousands of other cryptocurrencies, there's probably 10 or so that are pretty commonly used by threat actors that are harder to trace. They're harder to use, but they're harder to trace. And as we lock them down or start to be able to trace them, they can create new ones. And that's just the so you look at a blockchain platform or cryptocurrency like you look at the internet. It's not, you're not shutting off the internet anytime soon, right? Like you could probably impact parts of it, but it's autonomous. And these these cryptocurrency platforms are similar in their structure. So no, I don't think the cryptocurrency approach is really going to solve our problem. And I don't know if anybody knows this, because I know you guys are all kind of based in Illinois, but I'm actually based in Colorado normally, but I'm currently talking to you from Rochester, Illinois. And if you saw me on TV, I was representing Springfield, Illinois all week. I was in a law office in Springfield, Illinois, and said Springfield, Illinois on CNN. So I'm representing Illinois this week.
Well, you're representing us well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Bethany?
I don't see any other ones that
Okay.
are coming in.
All right. Well, Kurtis, thank you very much for joining us today. As Bethany mentioned, this was very informative. I think, a lot of great information, and obviously a topic of great interest, out there, and the things everybody can do to prevent it, from happening, which is important. So, thanks, for presenting for us today, and, and the offer that if anyone's got any questions, we can reach out to you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm here to help, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.